right, good. Good to see you, man. Thank you for doing this.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
We're pretending we're doing a podcast.
Yeah.
We're kind of doing a podcast, but we're making a movie.
Yeah.
I'm not sure what it is, but we're going to have fun. We're here today, of course, to talk about this epic feat of strength that you accomplished, this quest to outlast a Tesla. So let's start with explaining where this idea came from and what it was all about.
Yeah, so it came about as I was planning out my year for what I wanted to accomplish as far as challenges, and 10,000 an hour talking about different things. And I really knew this year I wanted to do around a 250-mile race. I was thinking about doing Cocodona, and 10,000 had thrown out this idea of outlasting a Tesla. But initially the idea being is it would be a relay with me and a bunch of other athletes, and we would just relay it until we outlasted it. And as we started looking at the different models of the Teslas and length of battery life and such, I saw that the Model 3 was around the 250 mark. And I said, guys, let's just let me do it.
Yeah.
And that would kind of combine these two efforts. And then the reason being for me was it was a good way to explore that distance, but also bring into focus this like thing of positive innovation that is the Tesla. And I thought there was some level of similarity between its energy source and me being plant-based, kind of as this like celebration of those two things. And that was where we came up with the idea.
It's one thing to go out and say, I'm going to run 200, 250 miles. Either you enter a race or you create your own self-styled adventure. But what makes this so compelling and cool is this added layer of introducing the Tesla. Like outlasting a Tesla, this is the distance that I want to do, but this man versus machine thing I think is really cool. And there was something that came up in the documentary that I thought was really interesting that I hadn't really thought about, that I want to hear more about, which is this idea, you alluded to it just a second ago, but this idea that the Tesla is like this genius of innovation, but because it is a machine, it is by definition, de facto, built in with certain limits that cannot be exceeded. That battery will only last so far, and then it's done. And yet, conversely, the human spirit does not have a limit on it. So talk a little bit more about that.
Yeah, I mean, we put the barriers on us as humans. We don't put them there for a machine. Or a machine does have. We know its finite energy level, what it can do. And for us, I think we so often discredit ourselves for what we are capable of. And so we have an override that a machine can't. It has a point, it gets to, it's done. Whereas with us, you may think you are, but you can continue to push if you want to. And if you see it through, like, great things can come out the other end. But, I think it's a lot, I don't know.
Right. Well, the Tesla battery will go into the red, and you know for sure it's going to tap out. When the human goes into the red, who knows how long that human can last?
Yeah,
right?
even
part
that
of being
human,
an
right?
ultra runner
Yeah.
is like, let's see how far we can extend this red zone.
Well, and it's like also like finding that red zone and assuming that you're about done, you can't make it any further. Yet every time you break through to the next chapter of that event, and you can continue to push further. I mean, in this, at the end, I was running 9-minute miles in the last 2 miles.
I noticed you were throwing down pretty hard
Yeah.
right there at the end.
The fastest miles are the last miles.
Yeah. Yeah. The Balenger battery, the Tesla battery's got nothing on the Balenger battery.
Yeah.
Right. For a lot of people, running a marathon is a life goal. For many years, it was thought to be the outer limit of human capability, athletic capability in terms of endurance and distance. In more recent years, we've seen this explosion in ultra running, people initially doing 50-mile races. How does somebody run 50 miles? And then 100-mile races and 135-mile races. Talk a little bit about the difference between marathon running and then maybe a 100-mile race. But then anything more than that, it all feels like it's kind of the same. 100 miles, 200 miles, 250 miles, it's long, right? So what is the difference between training for a marathon, training for a 100-mile race, and then wrapping your mind, body, and spirit around going 242 miles, which was the distance of this affair?
I mean, from a training perspective, I think for marathons, it's a science because that was the distance for so long. It's been figured out, and there's very like applicable like training plans that'll get you there. And then we go, now that's where a 100-miler is. Like now we know that. And anything past that to me is where we're getting into this uncharted territory. And it's a guessing game in a way. It's like, how do you prepare but not overstrain yourself? And for me, it was just going back to really consistent miles. And I was doing like averaging 20 miles a day for 5-6 days a week for about the month and a half before it. And then like from a psychological standpoint, it's a mind bender for sure. In the film, I kind of talk in the beginning about this transition away from like drugs and alcohol, like giving me this, feeding my soul, and it becoming the ultra running. And what's interesting is I think when I was referring to that, I was thinking about those party drugs and, the booze and the cocaine and all of that. But then by the end of the film, we get into this space where it was much more like this like spiritual psychedelic experience. And I think it's just interesting that like how that evolved and how it became such a wild, like trippy experience that really just resonated deeply like in my soul. Like I feel like a lot of growth came out of this effort in a concentrated amount of time in a way nothing else has.
Yeah, pushing the boundaries not only of your body and mind but of your psyche, your consciousness, right? So can you put words to what it is that you think you're seeking through these types of challenges?
It's like looking for those breakthroughs that only come through whittling yourself down to nothing. And what they are is just to feel more settled in myself and confident in the person that I am. And by testing myself in these situations, I seem to come out of it each time a little more confident, a little more sure of myself, and feeling as though I'm authentically living my life in a way that truly resonates with me and my soul.
Yeah, I think in the documentary you talk about this interesting relationship between running and drugs, and you characterize it as being the inverse of each other. Like running is the inverse of a drug. Like when you're doing drugs, you feel good doing them, and then you feel like shit afterwards, and running is the opposite. But when you talk about drugs and ultra running, particularly ultra running, it always comes up like, oh, well, I'm not saying you're an addict, but people who are in recovery are often criticized or accused of transferring that addictive sensibility or that compulsivity from one thing onto another thing and kind of shrouding it under this umbrella of it being healthy or more productive, but ultimately, still an addictive relationship. Like, how do you think about that?
Maybe it is, but like, it's a good one. I think it's much better than the alternative. And it's really like, also like, I keep going back to this in my head. It goes back to that quote that I think has evolved over time of Dean Karnazes, kind of is known for it now. And it's like, if you want to run a 5K. If you want to change your life, run a marathon. If you want to talk to God, run an ultra. Now push that out to 240 miles. You're talking to God.
Yeah.
Like the last day, the last morning, there was some serious talks with God.
And what was the exchange?
I mean, I think it was just the level. I think what I really gained from this one was an assurance in myself as an athlete. I think I've had a huge case of imposter syndrome since the first time we sat down and talked about my transcontinental run. And it's been this evolution of chipping away at that imposter syndrome and trying to own this person that I am in this space that I'm operating in. And when I crossed that finish line with this one, I was like, I'm accomplished. I feel pretty good about myself right now.
Yeah. I think you say something like, my resume is pretty badass.
Yeah.
Right? Like, no one can fuck with me now. Like, okay, maybe the first thing, a lot of other people have done that, but when you look at the breadth of, all the challenges that you've undertaken, it's pretty undeniable that, it is pretty badass.
Well, thank you. Yeah.
In the back to the training piece a little bit, like the human body can only train so much. So I can't imagine that the training for this, attempting to run 242 miles in under 72 hours, would really look all that different than the training that you would put in for a 100-mile
Yeah.
run.
No, it's about the same. It's really at that point, it's down to your grit and your gut and can your body hold up. But you can't train much past it. The reality, though, is now what I'm looking at is over the last couple of years of doing these things is the Transcon was training for this. The Colorado Crush was training for this. And now I've done the Tesla Challenge, and it's just training for the next thing.
And what is that next thing?
Three Peaks Challenge. So the highest point in Wales, Scotland, and England, and I'll traverse them in between by foot. So 430 miles, about 40,000 feet of gain. And the current record is about 8.5 days, and I'm going to try to go under it.
Whoa. Who set that record?
It was set just a couple months ago.
Oh, wow.
A Brit, yeah.
That's exciting, man.
Yeah, I'm really excited about it.
We're going to get into the heat. I want to talk about the obstacles. But before we do that, let's talk about the sleep deprivation aspect of this.
Mm-hmm.
That seems to be a trickier thing to train for. Some people are really good at it. Some people really struggle with it. But if you're going to run for 72 hours straight, you're going to have to take some rest breaks and some naps and the like. Like, how do you handle the sleep deprivation? And were there things that you did to train or prepare yourself for that?
I really going back to just the high mileage days, I felt like when I was training, I was always, for the first like 3 weeks, it was just getting myself to that cumulative fatigue spot to where I was running within the space of exhaustion every day. And that was really, it was just breaking myself down to where I was forced into running a 10.5-minute mile because it's actually hard to run slow at times. So that was a lot of it for me, was just getting to that spot. And then staying within it for a couple of weeks, just being real tired all the time.
Mm-hmm. But do you experiment with like, okay, for the next couple of weeks, I'm only going to sleep, 2 or 3 hours a night, or I'm going to get up in the middle of the night and start running?
No, I kind of wing it. I really like to prepare myself as much as possible, but also like know that at some point, like it's going to come down to just like guts and determination.
Talk a little bit about the resilience of the human body, because in watching the documentary, there were more than a few occasions where you looked like a rickety old man who could barely stand up straight or walk, let alone run. Yeah. And you're like, I don't know, 30% into this thing. And I'm like, this guy does not look like he's going to make it. He doesn't look like the guy who's running 9-minute miles at the very end of the thing.
Yeah.
Obviously, in a challenge of this duration, there's going to be high highs and low lows. But talk a little bit about how somehow the body and the mind are able to bounce back from setbacks and kind of get back on track.
It's wild. I don't really understand it completely, but yeah, there's moments where you're almost to a crawl. You can't do much. And then something just clicks and you're back on top. I really think a lot of that comes down to the people around you. And this was a big celebration of that. I was really lucky to have a lot of amazing friends and family that I've kind of amassed over the years within this running, and their energy is what would carry me through. Like without it, I would have probably just been a downward decline the whole time, but having the opportunity to engage with new people or just the same people coming back around, it would lift my spirits, bring me back up, and then all of a sudden the body works again too. It's like the mind is so much more important than the body. The body will follow what the mind wants to do.
Well, let's talk a little bit more about that community piece. I'm sitting here feeling both guilty and watching the documentary, experiencing a serious case of FOMO, because I know that you invited me and I really wanted to go and I couldn't make it. But to see, a bunch of guys that I'm friends with out there supporting you, clearly this was a team effort. At one point, Shelley, talks about this journey that you've been on towards like being open to community and help and team building, like going from kind of a solo nomadic approach to your running to being somebody who not only learned how to ask for help, but has really, embraced it. And that has been critical in all of these challenges. But in this one particularly, to see so many people show up to support you that are people that you've supported, right? Like it's very much, it's not just like, oh yeah, I'll go do that. Like you helped William and Hella and all of these guys, and they're, they show up for you. Like it's a pretty cool thing.
Yeah, it's great. I mean, it's something I've learned over the years is one, to be willing to ask for help. Like that was a big thing for me to overcome. But into what you said, like in me now having supported these guys through things too, what you realize is it gives so much to all of us. It's like a gift on either side. Like if they're helping me, that's a gift to me. But me putting them in this position to be involved in this crazy thing, everybody comes out just so inspired. Mm-hmm. So that makes it a lot easier to ask, even for people that are like completely naive to it. If I can get somebody out there, I'm like, I know this is going to blow their mind. Yeah. And so that makes it a lot easier because I'm learning that the human spirit wants to help. Like, and I don't think we really give that the credit it's due. Is like people want to help each other, but we stay so closed off from each other. And being able to put us all in those situations to come together as a team with one very singular, at the end of the day, very primal objective, it opens us all up to new opportunities, and new ideas are formed while you're doing it, and it just feeds into the next one.
Right. And that feed is so positive in this case. Like you got, I mean, you have two of the most positive guys ever. You got Dan Churchill and you got Hella.
Yeah.
Like those guys are just overflowing with like, you know, gratitude and excitement and, you know, good energy, right?
Totally.
Hella kind of understands what you're going through.
Yeah.
That might have been the first time Dan had been exposed to something of that length, breadth, and distance, though. It must have been mind-blowing for him.
I think it was. I think he was not really even aware of what that space looked like, the ultra space, and getting into this like uber long distance and the phases I would go through. You could see it in his face sometimes. He was terrified. And then he'd be like, oh, okay, he's fine. And I think, you know, we got to check in with him, but he was saying he was about ready for an ultra. So, you know, that's one of those catalysts, those moments.
He's an incredible athlete. I'm sure if he set his mind to it, he would.
I didn't realize how, like,
great.
You start reading about him and just even the heart rate thing kind of blows my mind.
Oh, yeah. He's got, what is his resting heart rate? Like 35 or something like that. Yeah, it's crazy. I know. Yeah. He's a quality human being for sure. And then you have William, who's incredibly accomplished. And he's saying on camera, like, oh, man, I wouldn't do this. Yeah. Like, it's so hot. And, yeah, you could feel the heat coming through, you know, the screen. So talk a little bit about the heat.
The heat was the factor of this effort. You know, initially I wanted to do it in 72 hours. It took 77. I think if it was 10 to 15 degrees cooler, I would have hit that goal. It created the challenge that we had to constantly work to overcome. And it happened quick. I mean, I think it was by 10:30, 11 a.m., it was already just sweltering hot. Mm-hmm. And I never really recovered from that first day of heat. It all kind of came together at a head right around the time of the crash. I was feeling the heat. I was starting to doubt whether this was a good idea because of it. The wreck happens. I continue on. And in that, I kind of pushed myself a little harder than probably I should have because my focus had changed a little bit. And then so throughout the first night, it was just dealing with like bad stomach cramps. I think it was a lot of lactic acid that had built up in my system and trying to process that. And then that night, it didn't even cool down. Like, you know, there isn't a lot of footage of the first night or two. But I remember at one point looking over into my headlamp, I looked over and I could see just the sweat still bubbling on my shoulders. And it was like 2 a.m. And you're like, that's not a good sign.
Yeah.
I didn't pee for 8 hours during the first night.
That's not good.
No, that's not a good sign. I wasn't able to get fluids in, much less food wasn't really happening at all, but fluids were even hard throughout that night. So we were just kind of always in a deficit from that point on. My mileage wasn't where it was supposed to be when I hit the 24-hour mark, and I was trying to play catch up from then on. And then the second day was, again, just as hot.
Yeah. And once your core temperature reaches a certain inflection point, it's very difficult to get it back down.
Yeah.
Were you thinking, why did I decide to do this in the Texas Hill Country? Like, the whole idea was to outlast a Tesla. Yeah. Nobody said where it had to happen. You could have done this in Minnesota.
Well, yeah, and it was in April. It's not supposed to be that hot in Texas in April. You know, I lived 10 years in Texas. There was a very, like, clear reason why I wanted to do it in Texas. Like, I found Texas to be, it's a place of just, like, just all this Texas lore, the grit, the hardness to it. And I lived, 10 years there. My grandfather was very proud Texan. He was actually born in Brooklyn, but he spent most of his life in Texas. And so coming back there meant a lot. And I knew it would present challenges. Initially, we were all supposed to do it in the Texas Plains, like out in West Texas. And then it got moved into the Texas Hill Country, which really changes things quite a bit.
Yeah.
And then, you hammer that on top with all the heat and rattlesnakes. A lot of rattlesnakes.
Right.
We were avoiding. I didn't really want to avoid one the first night. I was actually looking for one
There's
to
your
bite
exit.
me. Yeah, it's exactly what I was looking for.
Not to be, though. What was the lowest moment for you?
Waking up, going into the second day. I took a 50-minute downtime, and having struggled as much as I had up to that point, I was taking a rest in my van, got up, and just felt like, what the hell have I done? But you're kind of trapped in it. You're trapped within your intentions, and that's something that continues to magnify with every effort I do. There's more attention on them from when I start. You tell the whole world you're going to do it. Well, damn it, you better see it through.
Mm-hmm.
That's such a big focal point for me at this part of my evolution of adulthood, of being a man, is following through with the things I say I'm going to do. And you're just trapped in that. So it was dark. I didn't know what to do. I didn't really want to continue, but I really felt as though I had no choice. But that's where I want that. I'm trying to create that space where I have no choice.
And what is the mental self-talk that you give yourself to get back into action and not, dwell in that space? For
me, it's just making a pact with myself to go a little bit further, and then we can make the decision. It's always all right, I could stop, but I'm not going to stop. I'm going to go 10 more miles, and then we'll talk about stopping. And you just keep telling yourself that over and over, and just never let yourself actually concede to the challenges in front of you.
So this idea of trying to embody the man that you want to be, it feels like integrity with your word or aligning your values with your actions is really at the core of that, right? So maybe talk a little bit about why that is. Why is this your value set, and how are you trying to show up in the world allegiant to that?
Yeah. I think for me, the exploration of manhood has been very confusing for me, having my father pass away when I was really young. And I'm always been looking for it and trying to figure it out. And I remember at my grandfather's funeral, the preacher, who was actually my uncle, said, the one thing I could say about Bill Balenger, his dad, my grandfather, was his word was his bond. If he said he was going to do something, he was going to do it. And I think I'd always tried to understand what was that thing about him that was different. And when I heard that at his funeral, I was like, that's it. That's what separates him from most of the people I know. Mm-hmm. And now trying to evolve into that person as well.
Mm-hmm. So at some point, it becomes evident that you're not going to meet your 72-hour mark, right? Yeah. So I'd imagine that might have weighed on you in terms of, your word is your bond, right? So how do you stay plugged in to the challenge that still lies ahead when you're going to fall short of the ambition?
Well, I think it was about changing the perspective. No longer was it about hitting the goal, but it was now even the stakes were more about following through. Now, what was the way to test my character? I know I wasn't going to make the time. Well, there's an out. I can just stop at 72 hours. But what's going to show real character is to continue. I think for me, that's really important. And now through this effort, I know that's something I'm always going to do. I'm always going to finish, regardless if it's within this time frame for which I've set up or set up by a race or something else. And I've seen that in other athletes, and it's something that resonates with me, and now I even respect more.
Mm-hmm. So you have the heat. You got the rattlesnakes, you got the crash, you got the sleep deprivation, you have the stomach issues. There's a lot going on, right? Yeah. So I'm sure there are moments, like you just said, where I'm out, I can't go any further. And I think it would be really helpful to hear a little bit more about how you push through those difficult moments. What is it inside of you that you're calling upon in order to tap into that extra gear?
I think it's embracing it and remembering that that's where the growth happens. That's where the big breakthroughs happen. So when you find yourself in that spot, it's really hard to do, but get over the pity party and get in line with the fact that you ran X amount of miles to get right here so that you will be in this spot. Don't shy away from it. Lean into it. And if you lean into it, something great's going to come out the other side. I've yet to disappoint myself in that.
You were talking about those moments where you meet God, right? So there is a spirituality to all of this. And in the documentary, you kind of throw out in passing, like the universe provides, right? So there is like a sense of oneness or a connection to the intangible that occurs when you're stripped down to that extent. So maybe help us understand what that experience is and the meaning that you garner from that.
Well, it is. You're tearing yourself down to this spot where you're so raw. Like it's just you, the road, and exhaustion. There's nothing else left. And in that space, it's like you are just open to all the energies around you. I become more emotional. Like everything becomes just so much more raw. And in there, it's like the parables of life come through. And like everything someone says, it's like I can find the deeper meaning in it. And then I come out the other side like so inspired and on top for a little while. And I think I'm really almost addicted to that part of it. It's the high that comes in the months after. And then, then there's a lull. And then it's like learning to be okay with that lull too. Like it's just this, and maybe it's like some undiagnosed mental issue, but like, I'm just always on this. There's peaks and valleys. And I think we can all like work really hard to erase these parts of our essence, but why not just embrace them and learn how to like ride those waves and just find that center ground where I'm never like, it's just these efforts are such a parable for life. There's so many highs, there's so many lows. They come around the corner and you get smacked in the face with exhaustion that you didn't have 5 minutes before and you have to deal with it. Well, life does that to us too. And how do we get better at anything? It's through repetition. So if I can create an experience that allows me to have many repetitions of this highs and lows, I come out the other side stronger and more prepared for those when they just come through in life.
Like compressing 2 decades of life experience into 72 hours.
Yeah, why not?
Like roller coaster of experience. But I think there is something really special that transpires when you push yourself to that outer edge and even a few steps beyond it, because you meet yourself as you really are. Like, as you said, everything else gets stripped away, and there's a certain indelible truth to that, right? You talk a lot about authenticity. Like, this is the presentation of the authentic self and all its faults and all of its beautiful components, right? And there is a psychedelic aspect to that too, because you have this heightened awareness and consciousness that allows you to connect with gratitude, for example, which I know is another big piece, and love, because you're surrounded by these people who are all working hard to support you in this endeavor.
Yeah, and all those things exist, and it's too. It's like that authenticity comes through having nowhere to hide. You're there. You've stripped yourself down, and at this point, it's like everybody's watching you. There's cameras on you. They're gonna create a film out of it afterwards, and getting to live in that space where it's just there's nowhere to hide, and all you have to you have to rely on nothing but yourself. It doesn't matter what shoes I have on. It doesn't matter the poles that are helping me along. Like, I've got to do the work, and that's the authenticity I talk about, is finding that space where there's nowhere to hide, and you have to show up.
And talk a little bit about the gratitude piece.
Yeah, it's big for me, and it's what propels me. And it's what, in a way, made this one very challenging. My mental state, due to the events on day one, kind of derailed my normal, very positive space I stay in during these efforts. And that's where a lot of the battle happened, was between myself and my negative tendencies, those negative talk that I can have about others. I think we all do it. We don't want to talk about it, but it's there. And I had to face that head on.
But that was the challenge for you to overcome. It's like it's like life or the universe put that in your path because obviously this is something maybe you need to work on. So here, I'll throw you this one. Let's see how you do with that.
Yeah, exactly.
Right? And I'm going to do it early on in the thing. So you're going to have to contend with it, for the next 3 days.
Yep. And it did. And that's what it did. It said like, yeah, here you are, face this one. And what was interesting is I faced it and I was dealing with it, and I don't know how well I was succeeding. And then midway through the second day, the universe provided again. And Alexis Avisher showed up.
Mm-hmm.
She's like a family friend of ours. It goes back to the Transcon. Her family brought us in on the last night in Teaneck, New Jersey, before I ran into the city. We stayed with her family. We had never met any of them.
Wow.
And since she's shown up, she was at my Central Park Loop Challenge, and then she shows up for this. No one told me. It was a complete surprise. She bought the ticket like 8 hours before. And like there it was, like this aura of like kindness and generosity brought in to like pull me out of that negative space. I was in it until that moment when I turned around and there she was.
Right. Total surprise.
Yeah, and that's where gratitude, it's like being open to like other people's energy and what they can bring to you and not closing yourself off from that. It's one of the things like I learned in this is like be open to other people wanting to help you and wanting to be there and be a part of something you're doing. Like I can get so in my head in normal day life, I won't even notice someone's there. Whereas like in this, it's like she showed up and I was brought to tears over it. I still almost am. And there it was. It like balanced it out. It didn't take away the frustrations of what had happened, but it created a balance that allowed me to move forward and start to enjoy the effort again.
Mm-hmm. At one point, I don't remember at what stage of the challenge you were in, but you said, well, like things were going kind of haywire, and you go, well, when the going gets weird, the weird turn pro. Now, that would be fine for anybody to say, but I know you well enough to know that Hunter S. Thompson is your spirit animal. So talk a little bit about this Hunter S. Thompson, love affair that you have, and how his sensibility kind of informs, your running and your philosophy on life.
It's just like, I think he had another quote or a saying, something along the lines of like, the only people that know where the edge is those that have went over it. And it's just this idea of skirting the edge of possibility, the edge of where we should be, what we should be doing, and stepping into the audacious. And that's the thing, like audacious is becoming like a word very synonymous with me and the things I like to do that I've put it out there. And he embodies that. And it, for me, has been an evolution of when that was partying. Like, obviously, that's something that Hunter S. Thompson very much embodies. But I think so much of the parables of the way that he lived and stuff, you can take out that bad stuff, and it's still there. I mean, he wanted to live authentically and raw, and that's all I want out of life, is just like an authentic, raw experience of this world. I think there's just so much bullshit and just contrived things around us, and we can hide behind those, and we can kind of just follow suit with them. But I'd rather be more bold. I really just appreciate more his energy than the action.
And so where is that edge for you?
I don't know. I'm still looking for it. I got to find it. No, I don't want to go over it. But to me, it's the edge, and where I find it is through exhaustion, through getting myself to that space. And it's just, I really love it. Like I love getting to that point of depletion. It's the most solid, unbelievable space I've ever found.
So for somebody who's looking to find their version of that experience in their life, maybe we can end this with a few thoughts of inspiration for somebody who is inspired by watching this documentary and is starting to think about, like, maybe I should do something audacious.
I'd say go for it. And the cool thing is you build, right? Like, what is audacious? It can be running a 5K. Where are you at in your life? It's not anyone else's business what's audacious for you. What is that thing that's going to push you past your limits? And start there. Get comfortable with the uncomfortable. And then what's interesting is what's uncomfortable just keeps getting a little bit further out and further out and further out. And you can take that as far as you want it. And I think that's the beauty of it. It's all like, it's an individual pursuit, and it's our line is in different places. Like mine's pretty high, but there's people past me.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's the beauty of it, is we can all just find something that challenges us, is a little bit bigger than we think we can do, and pursue it. And it's not frivolous. It's not, you should be putting your time somewhere else, because it goes back to these parables. You'll learn a lot from it. So take the time, eliminate something that's not feeding your soul, that's not doing positive for you, and replace it with something that might seem abstract. Like nobody needs to do an Ironman, but maybe you want to do it. You'll get a lot out of it. Your family will get a lot out of it. It'll be worth everybody's time.
I think that's a good place to end it, but maybe we can just put a pin in the whole thing. Let's end this with some thoughts on your relationship with time. There's this idea that Shelley talks about in the documentary, that an event like this will transpire in the blink of an eye, but it's an experience that is going to live with you forever. So how do you think about these challenges in the context of meaning and memory? And, when you're in the midst of these things, like, what does time feel like for you?
It changes, that's for sure. Like, time is such an interesting thing that can go in so many directions. Like you can be in flow state and all of a sudden hours went by and you didn't know, thought it was 5 minutes. In these, it tends to go in the opposite direction. 10 minutes feels like 10 days. And maybe that's why you're able to grow so much during it, is you're elongating it and you're getting so much more out of it. And then you get to carry that with you for the rest of your life. To me, like, I met death early in life. My father died when I was really young. And I think I've always looked at life as like very finite, and it's happening quick, and you never know when it's over. And I remember as a kid lying in bed being like, I just have so much shit I want to do. Like, I hope I get to do it all. And so when I take on these, they're noble pursuits of time. When I'm out there, there's nowhere else I'd rather spend that time than doing that thing. And it's because I feel fully alive and fully authentic. So I'm happy to give the time to that, and then have this gem that's with me forever. That whether it's kids, nieces and nephews, one day I'll be like, let me tell you about this thing I did.